Hey Ryan, thanks so much for being here on the Bible Story podcast. It was great to have you here at Covenant Bay this summer, speaking at our first family camp.
Yeah. Oh man, it was such a great way to start off the summer of speaking at camps, and I'm honored to be back here hanging out with you again. I'm coming from Vancouver where it's pretty nice out, and I hear you guys are buried in snow, so I'm not missing out on that.
We are getting our first snowfall of the season. Well, I guess it's our second, but it all melted the first time. So this is going to be the first that stays with us. Okay, so we're talking about conflict and specifically today, inner conflict.
Yeah. Yeah, when you first invited me to talk about inner conflict, it kind of seemed like, like in a world where there's conflict everywhere, you can watch like live online conflict and wars and any social media app, it's just so much going on. Inner conflict seemed kind of small, but as I've kind of dug into it and thought about it more, the reality is I think that that's probably one of the greatest wars that wages like all the time, is that conflicting war within us. When I got married in our premarital, they said, one of the challenges is this person's going to know you better than anyone else. Well, the truth is that even though they know me better than anyone else, they still don't even know me as well as I know myself. And even I don't even know myself that well because I have all these blind spots and tensions and kind of this inner conflict that we're talking about. And so I think about that. It was just like this messy situation of being so aware of some of my dirt, but also being so aware of some of my blind spots, my shadow, that's like kind of these shortcomings as well. And as a result, I find so often me and many people I know are so conflicted, we're hard on ourselves, and we're kind of just struggling with that all the time.
Yeah, I certainly have more than a few shortcomings, a dark shadow side, so to speak. And it's not real cool to be living in that space consistently, although I think that's maybe where I live most of my days. Ryan, we're looking at Romans chapter 7. And why don't you read that for us? And Paul actually reflects on this inner conflict within himself, and it's kind of like he's reading my own journal and saying exactly what I'm thinking at times.
Yeah, I actually, when I read it, I almost wonder if he's reading like my wife's journal in like our toughest moments where she's just like, oh, this Ryan guy. So this is what Paul says. Romans 7:18, he starts, he says, and I know that nothing good lives in me. That is my sinful nature. This is not like one of those fluffy, like I can do all things through Christ's strength, through Christ who gives me strength passages. This is tough. I know that nothing good lives within me. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I am not really the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. And he goes on, he says, I have discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law with all my heart, but there's another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to that sin that is still within me. I read this and there are kind of two feelings. One is I'm like, this is so like demoralizing because even Paul, guy wrote a whole bunch of the Bible, has all these challenges. Like, what hope is there for me? But then I also feel seen where I'm like, oh man, how many days I'm like, oh, I want to be that patient dad. I want to be that selfless husband. I want to make the right choices. I want to do all this. And I just can't do it. I don't know if your shadow side resonates with that at all or not, John, but I
Yeah,
feel.
I completely get where Paul is coming from. And like you said, it's so nice to see that somebody who's like this father in the Christian faith, so to speak, is like right there in the trenches with me, is like, oh, he screws up too, just like I do today. Oh, it's
Yeah.
so good to know.
One of the things that was really eye-opening, like I've read through the Bible several times, but sometimes you read passages and they really hit you in a particular way. I remember one time I was reading in Matthew 6 in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus goes into this kind of three-part mini series. He talks about giving to the needy, prayer, that's where the Lord's Prayer is, and then fasting. And what's interesting in all of them is he starts out by saying, don't do it sinfully or don't do it wrong. Don't do it like the pagans or the tax collectors or the hypocrites or whatever, like the Pharisees do it. And I've read that and I'm often like, yeah, obviously I wouldn't want to do it like them. But also one time it hit me where I was like, I was reading, I was like, man, does this mean when I'm like praying, I can be sinning still, or when I'm giving to the needy or fasting, I can still be doing it in like a wrong, selfish, sinful type of way. And I was like, how conflicted and how messed up am I within? And that's like, it was a really convicting moment where I was like, man, like there is really this inner conflict that Paul's talking about in Romans 7, even when I'm unaware of it, that is always raging, even in the kind of like better moments of prayer and stuff. So I I want to share a story. One of the things, one of my hobbies I'm really into, and it's not really a cool hobby, but I'll share it anyways, and people can judge me if they want. But I'm really into these like kind of nerdy strategy board games. Love playing those. And I had this one friend. He and I used to play this one game in particular, and it was this like DC Comics kind of deck building game. Anyways, you don't need to know what it is, but this one game, a lot of games I lose. This one game, when he and I would play, the majority of the time, the vast majority of the time, I would win it. But there'd be moments where he'd be like getting ahead during the game. It seemed like it was all going his way. And at the end of the game, we'd count up the score and he would still have lost. And I remember this one time he looks at me, he's like, Ryan, even when I'm winning, I'm losing. You know, he's like, I got this
Oh
feeling
man.
that I'm like taking steps forward, but then I'm faced with this reality that it's like, I'm still losing. And I think those moments of like self-awareness, like hitting us in the face, or that self-realization, it's kind of like Buzz Lightyear coming to terms with the fact that he is in fact a toy. It's us coming to terms with the fact that it's like, even though I want to live this way, I still continue to struggle. Even though I made these resolutions, even though I said, I'm going to exercise every day, I'm going to eat better, I'm going to cold plunge every day, I'm going to be more generous, I'm going to sleep more, I'm going to be more patient, all these things. And then we continue to fail. And it's that realization of like, even when I have the right intention or the right idea, I still struggle.
But yeah, I can relate with that. That there is just this sense of like, hey, I'm doing it. And then all of a sudden, the end of the day, it's like, oh, wait a second. I I I didn't do it.
Yeah.
I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Man.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I mean, if we ended this conversation right here, I think maybe we could gain something about being self-aware, but it's kind of bad news that we've reflected on so far. And this passage Paul's talking about is like really this kind of negative view of kind of the sinful inclinations of people, the selfish draw that we have. But one of the things I love about the Bible, the arc of it, is that there's always good news coming. You read the Old Testament and you're like, how messed up are these people? Why are they worshiping a golden cow? Like, why are they making these choices? And we realize, oh, we make a lot of those same choices, but in that story, there's always this good news coming. And Paul wraps up this passage, and I think we should get to some of the good news. So there's a little bit of hope from this podcast. First of all, he really hammers away at the bad news in verse 24. He says, oh, what a miserable person I am. Oh man, how often do I end a day feeling like, what a miserable person I am? How
Yeah.
did I mess everything up so badly? And they ask this question, who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? Fortunately, although it is kind of a rhetorical question, he actually answers it in verse 25. He says, thank God, the answer is in Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Mm.
Ah, what a liberating truth, right? Like, how many of us have lived like so much of my life, my adult life, I've been on the Tomorrow workout plan. I don't know if you've ever tried the Tomorrow workout plan where it's like, yeah,
I'm killing it on the tomorrow workout plan. It's the today workout plan that's not going so well.
yeah, like so many of us, what we're like paying gym memberships, right? Like that we're like, well, tomorrow I'm going to start, so I won't cancel it yet. And like, and in any area of life, I'm going to deal with this, I'm going to deal with that. What's great is that there isn't a tomorrow plan that we need to be on to fix our behavior and to fix our conflict inside ourselves, because there's this like 2000 year ago plan that Jesus did where he comes and he's the solution, the liberating truth. He comes and pays the price for our inner conflict, and he comes and sets peace at the war within us. We still continue to struggle, and that's what Paul's talking about. But at the end of that, at the end of the day, there's always that hope that Jesus is a bit bigger, or a lot bigger. He can help us bit by bit to take those baby steps and to be set free from that kind of inner conflict.
I love that. So Ryan, let's bring this home,
Yeah.
because this is pretty heavy topic, and one that, I don't care where you live in the world. I don't care what issues you might have. You can relate to what Paul has to say in these verses, regardless of the season of life that you might be in. So let's
Yeah.
kind of wrap this up. Let's bring it home. What are some what's a recap of this that we could give our listeners?
Totally. Yeah, I agree. I think if you can't relate with the words of Paul, then your whole life might be a blind spot. I'm sure we're all in
Right?
this boat together.
Yeah.
At least I hope we're all in this boat together. I hope I'm not the only one. But here I think are two common traps that I would encourage people to stay away from when we're talking about this. I believe we need to grow in self-awareness. It's one of the biggest issues. And we need to be honest about how to deal with that. But as we're coming to terms with this truth, I think there are two traps we can fall into. And the first one is being too hard on ourselves. Just beat ourselves up. We just, oh, I'm not good enough. I meant to be this like this. I meant to do this. I want to do this. I'm such a failure. Why did, and we take it out on ourselves. And that only exacerbates the issues. I know with my kids, sometimes when they mess up, I do the right thing and I'm the gentle father that's like gracious, but then sometimes I exacerbate the issue by being hard on them. And when we do that to ourselves, it only just makes it worse. It perpetuates it. So being too hard on ourselves is, I think, is one big trap. Kind of on the other end of the spectrum, I think we can be too dependent on ourselves. We can have too high of a view of ourselves where it's like, okay, I've got these issues and these issues, so I'm going to like fix it all and like find the path forward and move forward. And I really call it like behavior modification. It's that tomorrow plan. Well, tomorrow I'm going to fix all this and all that. I think both of these, whether it's being too hard on yourselves or being too dependent on yourselves, I think those are two of our main go-tos. And I think they have two common features. Both of them are driven by focusing on ourselves rather than fixing our eyes on Jesus. Both of them live in just the first chunk of the passage we read and leaves out that last verse. The answer is Jesus. The answer isn't Ryan. The answer isn't John. The answer isn't anybody. When we focus on ourselves, we become very selfish and we need to look outside of ourselves. This is kind of the interesting juxtaposition, is that the solution to our inner conflict is actually found outside of ourselves, not inside ourselves. It's found in Jesus. And then both of them, I think, diminish our ability to trust God. On one hand, if you're being too hard on yourself and living a life of like guilt and like beating yourself up and all that, then you're forgetting to trust God's great gift of grace that liberates you from that and forgives you. But if you're being too dependent on yourself, then you're forgetting to trust God and forgetting about his great gift of grace that liberates you from that and is the one that actually works out your issues for you. And so I would encourage anybody, like somewhere there's that, you want to be aware of the issues and you want to be aware of what's next and maybe taking some steps. But in the middle, there's this Jesus standing in the middle who's like, let me be the answer. Let me be the hope.
Oh, I love that. Hey, each week we wrap up our time together with a set of questions. So Ryan, if you're going to read our second question for us, I'll read the first and the last one. The first question is this, and you guys can discuss these questions together as a group. Okay, so the first question is this. What is an area in your life where you just beat yourself up and it's not good, but you just do it and you need a different way? So what is an area in your life where you beat yourself up? Hit pause and share. All right, Ryan, question number 2.
Yeah. What area do you try and go it alone? What are those areas where you're forgetting to get help and outside help and trust Jesus and maybe even partner with people around you to come into the inner conflict? So what area do you try and go it alone? Hit pause and discuss.
Okay, so our final question is this. In what way do you need to surrender to God? Hit pause and discuss. Hey, Ryan, thanks so much for being here with us this week. You brought a lot to us. You've given a lot for us to think on. So thank you so much.
Oh, John, thanks so much for having me. It's been such a gift to get to be a part of your camp and now this podcast. So thanks again for having me.
Hey, and if all goes well, maybe we'll have you back this summer and people can get to know you in person. That would be really cool.
Well, you said there are like nerdy strategy board games there, so I guess I have to come.
Yeah, there is a reason for you to be there, right?
It's great. Yeah.
Connect with each other throughout this week. Pray with each other. Check in and encourage one another and keep your eyes set on Jesus, because that is the best way I can think of to grow in a relationship with him. Take care.